All right, and we are live finally. Sorry for the we had a little bit of a delay because of technical difficulties. That was my fault. And now we are here. I'm Jordan Zach, and I'm here with Kai Newkirk, who is he is running for Congress in Arizona, the fourth district. Very exciting. It's been a longtime activist, a name that I've recognized and worked with a little bit, and now all of a sudden he's running for Congress. Kind of came out of the blue a little. Well, for me, out of the blue a little bit. But thanks for being here.
Great to be with you, Jordan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, like I said, you've gotten so you're running Arizona's fourth. I know that's suburbs of Phoenix or so. What you got in pretty last minute, and I was pleasantly surprised when I saw the news. I was like, I think it's an Axios or something. I was like, wait a second, because Greg Stenton, who's a congressman there, he's really never been opposed on the Democratic side, and you decided to do it. So, what made you jump in?
Well, a lot of things. People had asked me to run against him for some time over the years that I've been here. Um, but I think there was a greater urgency that developed over the last few years as we've been fighting to end the genocide in Gaza. And I was a leader in the movement here, trying to make that happen, to stop that horror, and pushing all of our Democratic elected officials, federally, in the area, and making some progress with some of them, but not with Stanton. And I was part of a delegation to his office and then a meeting with him with Palestinian and Jewish constituents. Eventually, he put out a very weak and conditional call for a ceasefire, but just continued voting time and again to send military aid. When Biden paused the 2,000 now bomb shipments, he um, spoke out against that and said you need to resume those illegal arms sales. And when the International Criminal Court uh, indicted Netanyahu and the Hamas leaders for war crimes, he voted to sanction the International Criminal Court. So just kept doubling down on that position. And I think that's unacceptable. And folks that I organized within that movement, started asking me, hey, we're not moving him. Can we try replacing him? Would you be willing to do that? And then after Trump's election, when he voted for the Laken Riley Act, that was a
Right.
huge validation for me, empowering Trump's authoritarian mass deportation campaign, giving ICE more power, something very personal to me, a movement I've been in, fighting in for a long time. And then just not really showing up with the urgency and force required to stand up to Trump's authoritarianism, just the sense of the costs of having a corporate Democrat in a position in Congress where we could have a stronger Democrat who not only is not fighting against this corrupt and authoritarian status quo the way that we need to, but in many cases enabling or facilitating it, taking so much corporate money in all these different ways. So, um, the conversation, I had talked with a lot of people in the community who asked me to consider it. I got in late because uh, one of my dearest loved ones has been fighting cancer over the last year, and I wanted to be available to be with them. And it was a hard process trying to figure that out. And ultimately, they told me if I believed it was the right thing to do, they wanted me to do it. Um, and so I decided in March after that conversation prior to a major surgery to go for it. And it's been a race ever since then. It was 13 days before ballots. I'm sorry, before the deadline for signatures that we announced. And so we had to really, really go hard just to get the signatures to get on the ballot. People said we couldn't do it. They wanted us to win. We needed 1,274. We turned in 2,250 because so many people came together just in those 13 days. And since then, we've just been running and building.
No, that's great. And like, it was one of those things where, he's been not challenged. He's with the head of the New Deal, not New Democrats, the New Democrats in Congress. He's got a lot of money. It's a big thing to take on, and you jumping in late. Some people spend a lot of time fundraising before they run. And so, how have you been able to kind of deal with that?
It's been a challenge, there's no doubt about it. I've learned a lot, but I think just on the strength of my record, history as a leader, relationships I've built, and fundamentally just the gap between Stanton's positions and votes on a lot of these really important issues and where most Democrats are at is just a huge vulnerability, right? And just for somebody to step in and say, hey, what about this? This isn't right. This isn't how Democrats want to go. There's just, there was just a big opening there. And I was the one who was willing to try to take it on. And then just we built a strong movement, people coming together and doing the work, and all the volunteers bringing out our winning message to people. And when we talk to Democrats about these issues, and they're asked, well, do you want a Democrat who voted for the Laken Riley Act or one that is fighting to abolish ICE? Do you want somebody whose top contributor is APAC or somebody who's been fighting to stop the genocide? Do you want somebody who takes money from United Health Group and opposes Medicare for all, and one who's fighting to guarantee health as a right, not a privilege in our country? So on all those issues, right? Um, and we've been building, and now internal polls showing us tied. The numbers in terms of response, people who support me or have already voted for me on the doors and the phones are very strong. Um, and now we're seeing more national momentum. Right, it's the only only primary happening this month. Right,
Right.
to build on the momentum for Colorado and New York, New Jersey, we can be the next big progressive victory. He's got a PAC top contributor, a lot of corporate money. Raised somewhere around $2 million. Um, and we haven't got to a quarter of that yet, but we've got, I think, a lot more donors than him, and we've built enough to be able to run a competitive race to get to this point, right, where he's nervous and they're fighting and pushing back, and the victory is right there to be seized.
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough fight, and it's kind of got become a bit of a nasty campaign. I know, I got to ask you about this earlier today, just like a few, maybe an hour before this. Arizona Young Democrats organization came up with a statement just like an hour ago. Like I said, like they said maybe they'd heard some serious accusations against you, but they didn't give any specifics, which is kind of difficult. Like that's not helpful when it comes to this sort of thing, and puts you in a bad position. But I just want to open up the floor and ask like your response, because that's yeah, it's kind of out of the blue.
Yeah, no doubt. Disappointing. We got a lot of support from different youth organizations. Really glad to have them with us. Opponents have been trying to circulate this old discredited hit piece that was disavowed by the author, taken down off the internet. You can only find it, going onto the Internet Archive. Baseless attacks, disavowed. And just trying to throw it around and undermine us. And we've been preparing for this. We knew they were going to come at the point where they thought it was the greatest threat or they could disrupt things. And I wish we'd gotten to talk with the leadership there right before that. They got I think they sent that around, did have the opportunity to say, hey, you need to know the truth about this. But we're just going to keep reaching out to people, bringing them in, telling the truth, and fighting and focusing on the real issues of this race, um, which there's so much at stake. There's so much at stake for people in our country and around the world, just trying to get by, just wanting to feel safe from persecution on our streets, in our homes, right? Not wanting to be complicit in genocide and war crimes, wanting to feel like, as everyday people, as working class folks, we actually have some control over our lives and our democracy, and that we can have some shared prosperity rather than obscene inequality, trillionaire, while so many people struggling to get by and hundreds of thousands sleeping on the streets. So we're going to stay on track. We're not going to let our movement get disrupted by the weaponization of disavowed misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, so you think the Sand campaign is pretty much behind spreading this stuff?
I don't have any proof, right, of any particular person with the campaign, but we know there's people have circulated that are supporting him, right, or have come out for him, right, and pushing that. So look, I mean, we're a movement of love, truth, and people power. I say I love saying, like, I love all God's children. I hate the injustices. I hate his votes. I don't hate him. I don't hate anybody. There's people who didn't support me or against me and have come around, right? And so we just keep reaching out to people, and saying we're about reconciliation, we're about connection, we're about accountability. Anybody has a grievance with me, I'm open to it, to deal with it and respond to it. But at the same time, truth. We're not going to just um, we're not going to let baseless attacks go unchallenged, right? Or just be intimidated and misled by people throwing crap at the wall, right? Truth, integrity has to matter. That's a core value of our movement, and I think that's how we've overcome this stuff so far. And they're cranking it up, right? Because I think they feel the heat, right? They've seen the polling, they see the numbers, they see the energy, they see what's happening on social media, and they want to do whatever they can. But so many movements have faced this kind of stuff, right? And so we're prepared, we're ready, we're fighting, we're pushing through it.
Yeah, it feels like I live in New York City, and so we obviously had huge victories in the primaries last month. I guess it was last month. No, this month. I don't know what it was. It was last month, late last month. We had huge victories, right? Democratic Socialists win in two seats that maybe people didn't expect them to. It went great. Obviously, you mentioned Colorado, Mela Kuros winning. We had her on the live stream. I think it was in April or so. So like think this is there's a lot of like I think like you said the center right is getting pretty nervous, getting pretty
Yes.
desperate in a way, and it's getting pretty nasty. I mean, the Graham Platinum stuff happened, came to a head I guess last night when he dropped out. Do you get a sense that like there's um like the party's more divided than ever? Do you feel like it's more just like leadership on one side and everyone else on the other side? Like, what is your read of it?
Well, just say also I was, invited, by Brad Lander to go to the watch party, there, so I was there in New York, and it was awesome to feel that energy, and I made it to Claire Valdez's victory party and got to meet her, um, and, talk with folks that worked on it, like Hassan Piker and, a lot of the DSA leaders there, so we're trying to bring that wave, been to Colorado, it's moving west, coming to the desert here in Arizona. Um, yeah, I mean, the stronger you get, the more the pushback is until there's a decisive victory in something like this and kind of an internal struggle within about the direction of the party. Um, but we've been seeing this for some time. I mean, 2016 Bernie campaign, it was pretty rough, right? So it's nothing new. And I think that we've got to learn that you know, in my view, like the Kingian nonviolent tradition has the recipe for this, right? And folks know, I've been arrested over 25 times in nonviolent civil disobedience and led people on a lot of those actions. And I say I'll go to jail for justice again before I ever take a dime from APEC. And people are excited about that at the doors because they want somebody who's a fighter. And I've proven that I'll put my freedom and my safety on the risk to stand up for justice. But the nonviolent tradition, right, is very fierce in saying no to injustice, right? Being willing to disrupt the status quo, not being intimidated, even at the risk of our freedom and safety, standing up for what's right, but also keeps an open hand. Ultimately, not seeking to destroy anyone, to cause anyone harm, to hurt anyone, ultimately wanting reconciliation and reaching towards a higher ground. And I think that's the spirit we need in this fight within the party, right? Is to say, look, we need an anti fascist coalition. We need anybody who's opposed to authoritarian dictatorship to be with us and standing up to Trump and MAGA, right? And that's going to include people that are definitely not democratic socialists, right? But at the same time, we need to have a fight around corporate power in the party. And I think a lot of the Democrats that haven't been with us, they probably want that in their heart. You know what I'm saying? They don't want to spend their hours dialing rich people for money, and thinking about what is the donor class? Can I vote for the right thing? Right. So we have to stand up against it, push against it, but ultimately welcome them, reach them in. And if they've been part of terrible things or horrible votes, right, they need to take accountability for that one way or the other. But I think we've got to bring the spirit of just loving on people, right? Fighting on the truth, pushing forward, but saying, we know we ultimately need each other in some ways, right? In that anti-fascist coalition, we have to keep that in mind, right? So I think that's the spirit, and it's hard because there's some complexity there, right? And especially when with people who use dirty tricks, right? And they're slinging mud and lies and stuff like that. But I think that ultimately love and truth are most powerful, right? When we stand up with courage and conviction, when we do it together with people power.
I mean, it's powerful, and like you said, you've been doing this a long time. You are now jumping into running for office, but many years. You got arrested 10 years ago at the Capitol during Democracy Spring. I think I want to say, your protesting goes back to the Bush era. I know it goes back, maybe go back to World Trade Organization stuff in Seattle. So give us, yeah, give us CV. Tell us people what you've worked to this point.
I feel like I get bogged down in the years when I try to do this, but
The Cliff Notes, then.
the Seattle WTO protest was a watershed moment for me. For the younger folks, check out Battle in Seattle, a Hollywood movie, but does a pretty good job. Um, Baptism into the power of mass nonviolent action. I was in college at the time, grew up in West Virginia, son of a carpenter and childcare worker, and discovered organizing as a way to like, hey, we can shape the world to be more fair for my working class family, friends, neighbors, for the land that I was taught to feel a deep connection with. And I organized to go out there and join the nonviolent blockades in the street and ultimately, provoke this huge police crackdown, right? But it shut down and made it so they couldn't negotiate a new corporate trade agreement. So it kind of stopped the most powerful people in the world in their tracks, right?
Yeah, it was huge.
Unleashed this wave of momentum. So I was just caught up in that and just rolling. We were like, we're going to change the world in 5 years, 9/11 happened, right? And just horrific day. And it altered the course of history, I think, in just profoundly destructive ways, But we saw, many of us, even that moment of darkness, pain, and fear, right? We can't respond to this with this indiscriminate lashing out. And I was part of the college I went to. We organized a statement against that. It was the first school in the college or university in the country that spoke out against the war on terror. I read that statement in the last couple of years, and I was like, this holds up pretty good. We were right. It would be a disaster to go in this direction of this war on terror, right? Disaster at home and abroad. And it has been, right? But I stayed in the movement. labor movement. I was a shop floor leader in Los Angeles, um, and helped to win a union in a hotel that I worked in the immigrant rights movement, organizing fasts, marches, nonviolent civil disobedience. I'm best known for the work I did in the democracy movement, fighting to get big money out of politics. Primary founder of 99 Rising Democracy Spring, disrupted the United States Supreme Court, led a march from Sacramento, Los Angeles, all the way to Sacramento, 500 miles, 37 days, 12 straight days of sit-ins at the Capitol there, helped to pass 2 bills. And then Democracy Spring from the Liberty Bell march all the way to Philly. And then the largest number of arrests at the U.S. Capitol ever in one day, according to the Capitol Police. And that continued for a week. And we got most of the Democrats in the House at the time to sign on to our reform agenda, much of which became the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act. So been in Arizona since 2018, came here to be close to my wife's family. And I helped lead the fight to hold Kirsten Sinema accountable, trying to push her on the filibuster and all that, and then ultimately blocking her path to reelection. And then a lot of leadership in the climate fight that got a meeting with Biden's staff pushing around climate emergency. Then October 7th happened, and just tried to do everything I could to stop the genocide and organizing. And that was one of the things that led into this fight. But, I've devoted much of my life to trying to lead nonviolent struggles in many different fights, but there's a through line of trying to build what Martin Luther King Jr. called a beloved community, a society that's rooted not in domination and greed and hate and fear, but in solidarity and at a deeper level in loving our neighbors as ourselves, right? We see it in natural disasters, right? How people do incredible things to help strangers, right? That there's a goodness in who we are. If we can form a culture and institutions that supports that, right? Rather than pushes us towards our more primitive potentials of just trying to survive, against each other, then I think we can abolish poverty. We can live in a society where we make war a thing of the past, but we have to lead with the wisdom and believing in that goodness, our potential, but then the courage, the conviction to fight, to sacrifice, to really organize, to push there. And so, once you get on that path and you see what the difference it can make for people, and you have the sense that we don't have to be bystanders to history and to suffering and injustice, we can actually change it. It's hard to turn your back on that. And so I'm going to keep going as long as I got breath in my body. And now I'm trying to bring that same fight from the streets into the halls of power. And I think we can cause a lot of good trouble if you have leaders that can connect movements outside, right, to the fight inside.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a couple of things with, your history to extent as well. You mentioned, October 7th, obviously, you mentioned ICE, whatnot, and you mentioned him voting for the Lake and Riley Act. And what's remarkable to me is that 2020, I guess it's beginning of 2025, not a fair number of Democrats voted for that. And I think you can see, cynically, if you're like, oh, Arizona just went red, right? Still, Arizona just went for Trump. He's in not the world's bluest district. I mean, I can understand maybe him voting for it, but it's just, I wouldn't have supported it, to be clear. Arizona, the border state, but it's changed so much, and I know ICE has had a huge presence in Arizona. So tell me about how the dynamic has changed since then.
Yeah, look, I mean, I saw it in people close in my world, right, that are in the immigrant community, right? How during the Biden years, towards the end, right, that there was a sense of concern around disorder at the border, and right how things were playing out, and people on asylum versus folks that had been undocumented here for a long time, right? So I get it, that there was a shift in the public, right, and feeling like things weren't being managed well, but there was never a mandate for this kind of draconian interior enforcement, right? And so we knew this was going to be a fight. I mean, they were waving around mass deportation now signs at the RNC, who's the guy behind January 6th, right? And now he's in again. So Lake and Riley Act was the first vote to have a fight around whether we're going to just let Trump take the reins and cause this carnage, or we're going to stand up and do what we can to try to defend the values of the Statue of Liberty. And understand that vote wasn't something around, oh, we have to reform the asylum system, or no, we have to manage this or that at the border. It was around eroding due process, right, and interior enforcement. And so whatever, if Stanton saw the political, wins, we don't want people to govern like that. We want people to listen to constituents, but also follow conscience. And so it was either cowardice to see that this was going to help lead in this disastrous direction, and so I got to do it anyway for political expediency, or it was just a profound lack of vision and perspective, to be able to not to see that, right? Either way, unacceptable. And there's some Democrats that are running for reelection or other seats or voted for that, and they've apologized.
Mhm.
They've apologized publicly because they understand, oh, this helped pave the way for all this horror that has happened. But Stanton hasn't done it, right? And he's tried since I announced to show up to detention centers more and do things like that. But he's not going to call to shut down the Dilley detention center that he went to visit, in Texas. He's not calling to abolish ICE. Um, and he's not fighting it and recognizing the history, right? And taking responsibility for how he helped to enable that. So to me, this is of immense importance. I will never stop fighting to finally rectify the injustice of our nation, relying on so many undocumented folks who've been woven into our communities for years and decades in many cases, that we rely on to take care of our children, take care of our elders, to grow and serve our food, to build our homes, and yet somehow not to have basic status in our society, be protected from persecution, to have the rights of citizens or a path to it. No, it's unacceptable. We have to change that.
And tell me, you like you said, you've been organizing immigrant communities for a long time, and it has been bad in Arizona. A few weeks ago, we had Alejandra Gomez from Lucha on the live stream, and she talked a lot about that. So talk about how it's been the last couple of years, trying to organize around that, because I know it's been quieter than, let's say, Minnesota, Minneapolis, but I know it also has been difficult. And as an organizer, what is your on the ground view?
It's been a challenge. There's so much fear. There's so much fear in a lot of the communities that are most impacted. But we got to stay out there. We got to keep organizing. And we got to push back in smart ways and powerful ways. And I think that Minnesota led the way, right? And sort of really forcing Trump to back off a lot, right? And now they're trying to come forward more, right? But we really weakened his authoritarian mass deportation drive, right? And it was just mass nonviolent civil resistance that was the key. And so we've organized that here. People watching out for our neighbors, doing know your rights trainings, spreading the word, right? Organizing, pushing back at the ICE field office, right? And when they've done raids, I was at one where they were hitting multiple locations in this restaurant chain months ago, and where federal agents, right, shot pepper balls right at our feet. And there's just been there's just been so much pain and fear, right? But people have continued to organize, come together. And I think we've created enough political costs and contrasted, right, people standing together to protect our neighbors with the ugliness and the violence of families being torn apart, right? And saying, this isn't what Trump said, oh, I'm going to go after the worst of the worst, right? Well, they've been going after a lot of the best and going after people indiscriminately. And it's caused so much harm and damage in the country. And we organized in a way, and I think that brought the truth of that to bear for most people, and really made them pay a political price. But we have to keep going. You have to keep organizing. And I think the accountability piece for people who enabled it is key.
And so Greg Stanton never apologized for the Lincoln Riley vote. Just, I mean, it's interesting that maybe say along with Gaza, there's a lot of Democrats that were going along with what happened, and there still are Democrats who are going along with what happened and continues to happen with Israel. It's amazing how the politics of that have changed, though. I think it's been sort of a grassroots thing. Are you surprised by how much, not by how much people cared, people who do care, but how quickly that's turned, and how it's probably a factor in this race?
Politics on which issue in particular?
Both, either one, both of them, because obviously, and maybe even gossip, because that's
Right.
not on the ground there.
Yeah. Well, I think on immigration, right? We saw under Trump with the zero tolerance family separation how, like, crossing certain lines, right, brought a lot more people in, right? And some of them don't stay in, but a lot of them, it shifts their perspective, right? And so I think this round of just the horror that's unfolded has deepened that, and we've expanded. But we've got to really bring it home when Democrats get power again. We've got to win major just immigration reform and put us in a different place as a nation. Um, and I think, around Israel, Palestine, and Gaza, I just think that the scale of the horror of the genocide, would have to make an impact, right? And just the fact that our politics was such that this could continue to unfold, but we couldn't unlock some way for our government to either use our power to intervene to stop it, or say we're not going to be part of that anymore. I think there was just an awakening for people to feel like this is so beyond the pale, that this is happening, and that our nation is complicit in this way, and that we can't seem to shift that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's a profound transformation. I think we're going to win a huge shift in policy away from this disastrous policy of unconditional blank check support for the Israeli government, no matter what they do, violating our laws, international law, human rights, endangering, even create American lives, even leading to their deaths as the soldiers in the Iran war, Americans. So, but I think that we want to make it, so we need a shift, right? Uh, Ending military aid, arms embargo, sanctions on the Israeli government, and those responsible for these war crimes to compel not just an end to the genocide, but an end to occupation and apartheid conditions and enable democratically chosen Palestinian and Israeli representatives to work out a just peace that secures human rights and dignity for everybody there. But I think it can also be this movement in response, I think, is an opening. We have to seize as Democrats, as progressives, as democratic socialists to create a new foreign policy for our country, not just on this issue, but to renounce empire, to finally choose, stop straddling between democracy and empire, and just go with democracy, right? And build on
Yeah.
the legacy of the United Nations to say we want a foreign policy rooted in international law, human rights, democracy, and collective security consistently in a principled way that ultimately we give up the right to do terrible things, with impunity for domination. I never wanted that in the first place, right? But in exchange, we have a better chance to actually be safer, actually live with more prosperity, not to waste so much of our resources in the military industrial complex and this imperial footprint around the world, to bring our folks home and to work with the nations of the world to have a lasting peace. I think that's possible. Now is the time to fight for that and go in another direction.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, like, with Democrats or when Democrats come to power, obviously, Trump's still president, it's gonna be tough to do some things, but, I guess it was, Greg Stanton voted against impeaching Trump, so he didn't wanna do anything, but, um, long term, let's say you're getting to Congress and Democrats do get wanna pass some bills, maybe the show in 2028 or this coming cycle, but to get into power 2028 trifecta, what are the things that you really wanna see happen? Because there's, like you said, so much that needs to be done and so many big things that need to be done.
Yes, yes. If we get a trifecta, it's going to be such a tall order of what needs to be done. I think one piece we got to do right is accountability for the authoritarians and the fascists. We have to end this culture of elite impunity, which didn't start with Trump or the Epstein folks. Goes back to the Wall Street bankers. Goes back to Bush, Linus, and the Iraq War. But it's fundamentally corrosive to democracy. And we've got to end this corruption of big money in politics and separate wealth and state and really shift power from the oligarchs to the working class, banning super PACs, political spending, creating public financing, closing the revolving door, expanding voting rights, but also empowering union organizing, right? Dealing with gerrymandering, right? Reforming the Supreme Court, abolishing the filibuster to really shift towards a more responsive democratic system rooted in the people and not controlled by the donor class. And then when we do that, right, we can move on things like Medicare for all, right? Like a national living wage, fixed connected to fixed to inflation, tuition-free public colleges and universities, right? A Green New Deal, things that are going to really create a meaningful, obvious difference in the lives of working-class people. Like when FDR was fighting fascism and we delivered on Social Security and the New Deal, it was night and day for poor working class seniors, right? If you got to a certain point in your life between being destitute or just totally dependent on whatever your children could provide for you, or having a basic dignified retirement, right? We need to deliver things like that, like Medicare for all, where people feel, hey, from the day I'm born or my children are born to the end of my life, I know that I can get the care that I need. I don't have to fight with the greedy health insurance company. Um, and certainly we've got to abolish ICE, and um, restructure not just immigration law with path to citizenship and other reforms like more legal pathways, but how we do enforcement to make sure that these abuses never happen again. And obviously, pieces on foreign policy that I talked about. So there's
It's
so
a few
many.
things. Small checklist.
I know I'm forgetting things that are really close to my heart and all of ours, right? But those are some of the things I think that are key, right? And to defeat the authoritarian threat, I think those core pieces, right, is you have to actually stand up to them, stop them from seizing power, and then expand democracy. But we have to really deliver those obvious changes that help working class people to feel like we can all live a decent life in this country. That I think shores up the basic sort of democratic promise to be able to then do a lot of other things.
One of the things that you mentioned was when you were organizing to try and get Kristen Cinema to nuke the filibuster, which she refused to do. She's back, I guess, in the public a little bit with now her data center clients, which I guess is not working out for her that well. But talk a little bit about that, like that transition from that kind of Democrat to what you want to do, right? Like, it's a huge gap, and you had to try to organize against her. It must have been infuriating.
Yes, yes, so hard. I mean, we could have gotten so much more done, if we'd been able to end the minority veto of the filibuster. Um, and I'm from West Virginia, right? So Manchin, it was kind of strange,
Yeah.
Manchin doing that, and then here where I live now in Arizona, but I was helping to lead the fight to push them both. We did what we could, but yeah, I think she got to this place where she really represented a lot of the worst, sort of exploiting the position to try to live the high life, right? Um, and while blocking all this stuff and just showing kind of contempt for the coalition that elected her. You don't have to agree with everybody, but you got to show basic respect, right? Um, and that's the direction, right? Of just customizing customizing ourselves to a corrupt status quo, right? And it's so easy for that to happen. I think about if I get in there, I've really got to maintain my meditation practice. I also teach meditation. Got to really stay close to the people, close to the pain, close to the streets, right? To make sure that culture, those institutions don't get to me. But it got to her bad, gets to a lot of people. And it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal of our democracy and of people that in many cases folks came up with, like her. Um, so we got to transform the institution, transform the culture, but that starts with um electing leaders, right, who come out of movements and are really and are tested in a way, right, where we've really made some sacrifices and we've got some skin in the game and devoting ourselves to some principles, right, that can hold under the ferocious assault of trying to operate in on Capitol Hill, right, or in DC, right? So it's a cautionary tale. It's a tragic and cautionary tale, the tale of Kirsten Sinema in that respect. And I hope she turns it around, does some good, but we got to go in a different direction. That's what I'm trying to do.
It's difficult because there's so many Democrats. Maybe not like that as extreme as she was, but someone kind of like that, and some got primaried, some will, some will retire. But if you go to Congress, I kind of focus a lot on Democrats. That's the kind of thing that we can control, right? Like, got to defeat Republicans, got to stop them. That's the most important thing. But Democrats is the kind of thing that we can, try and lobby, we can try and change, we can try and move. Are you sort of ready for that challenge? Because I mean, your coalition you'll be part of is getting bigger, but still not the dominant part in the Democratic Party. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries will, I'm sure, be speaker. I don't know if you vote for him or not, but um,
No, that is not what I intend to do if I'm elected. But yes, it's a daunting challenge, right? You got to work with these people. You got to be part of an anti-fascist coalition in a close-in way, in a lot of ways, right? Collaborate on some stuff while also having these big fundamental disagreements. I guess I've gotten some experience with that as co-chair of the Progressive Council in our Arizona Democratic Party, where we have a lot of these fault lines. And sometimes I'm like, forget this, man. This is not a big deal, right? How we're working together. But I understand that there's no other path. There's no alternative to that. That our electoral system is such that there's these two kind of pathways, these two kind of institutional structures by which you can compete for power and govern. And the Democratic Party is the only one for people that have values like you and I. And so we just have to deal with that, right? And it's very difficult, right, to have those fights while still maintaining the cooperation, collaboration where we need to have it. But we need leaders that could do that, right? That are committed to taking on that challenge, to holding that complexity. Um, and I have a lot of experience in trying to navigate that. I'm sure there'll be some rough times and moments, right? But I think
right.
that if we stay true to our values and to what's popular, right, and we're willing to listen, right, and also still see the humanity in people and just work on it one day at a time, that North Star will lead us in a good direction.
And I don't want to take too much more of your time, but like I said, I live in New York. You were here during those elections. Once those happens, that's an urban area. It's a liberal, progressive, whatever, lefty urban area that, of course, they'll elect socialists. Then Malak Kuros wins in Denver, and it's like, well, it's Denver's a really young city, become very democratic, it's very blue. Um, your district, it's not red, but it's certainly not like the bluest in the world, right? It's the suburbs east of Phoenix. What do you think it means if you win this primary against Stanton? What does it mean for like the kind of the democratic socialist movement generally, and what it speaks to like what people are ready for?
Yeah. Well, I think period, regardless of the district, right? To defeat someone like Stanton, who was the mayor of, fifth, sixth biggest city in the country, right? Phoenix, co-chair of the New Dems, right? APAC is top contributor. It's going to send a shockwave through the party and here in Arizona, but nationally, right? Especially when it's around the fault line on these issues, right? Um, this district is solid Democrat, right? According to Cook Political Report, the partisan voter index is D+4, but Stanton won by 7 points in 2024, which is a bad year for Democrats, and 2 points went to a Green Party, right? In the kind of moment of the abandoned Harris stuff, there were some of those marginal, but still in some cases impactful efforts, right? Um, so that's a 9 point margin of the Republicans. So we're confident whoever wins the primary is going to win the general election. Republicans aren't going to win this seat, and I will support him in the sense of saying, yes, if he wins the primary, yes, we do need to elect him to defeat the Republicans, right? I would expect that he would do the same. Um, but it's an opportunity for Democrats. It's only the two of us on the ballot, right? To have a referendum on these issues, right? And I'm on the right side with the vast majority of Democrats. So if we get our message out to enough of them, as we have been, we can win this. And I think that, look, every place is different, has different experience, different culture within the common context of our country. And we're going to have to do some things differently and connect with people in different ways within our framework of values, as progressives, as democratic socialists, right? But I think that some of these core principles are just super popular wherever you are, right? In terms of getting big money out of politics, we should take corporate PAC money. That plays everywhere. I mean, everybody's on board with that, right? Of saying that we're going to fight for working class people over the oligarchs, that's popular. Standing up, even, abolishing ICE, right, has gotten to majority support of people opposed to the travesties that have been carrying out, right? Opposition to war crimes abroad. People don't want to be complicit in that, spend their tax dollars on that, right? So a lot of these principles that we're fighting for are ones that we can reach people with everywhere in the country. We got to listen, got to understand. We got to, we have to relate to people where they're at. It's going to be different in some places, but also in authenticity, just integrity, honesty, right? And sometimes you say, look, you're not a democratic socialist. I don't care. You know what I mean? You have your values, right? But let's talk about, and maybe you voted for Trump, right? But your gas prices are going up. Your groceries are going up. You're getting screwed by your healthcare company, right? Your utilities are skyrocketing, right? So let's focus on that. We can do something to bring costs down for working class families everywhere. We have common interests, common values, and when we can be honest about our disagreements while still treating people with respect, listening to them, and working towards common ground, I think that a movement like that can compete and win everything.
I mean, that was going to be my next question. There's a lot of the values you have, and I don't want to speak for you, of a lot of values you have shared with a lot of other democratic socialist people who, like our mayor here is Orman Dani. Do you package it a little bit differently in Arizona? Not in a like a deceitful way, but is it like, are there certain things that like people in Arizona care about that maybe they don't care about here in New York? Do you think that like, maybe got to talk about water more, data centers more? But what are the things that people really care about there that maybe we won't talk about here?
Yeah, I don't think I've used like language differently necessarily than I would have used there, but there's certainly issues that are more of a factor here that aren't, like water. I think that you mentioned is a huge one here in the desert in the context of the climate emergency. It's one of the things that Stanton has done some good work on, but in a more kind of narrow focus, right? But in the bigger picture, taking money from fossil fuel interests, right? Not fighting for a Green New Deal, not fighting for the scale of challenge that can actually enable us to stop the fossil fuel pollution and draw down carbon and restore a safe climate. If we don't do that, then all the other measures we take, right, we're going to be behind in terms of having enough water for to maintain our civilization here in the Phoenix Valley, the Valley of the Sun. So that's a big one, right? I think AI and data centers is an issue that's happening in a lot of places. And of concern to people across the country. There's one that's being built with a lot of community opposition in Albuquerque and part of the district. And I've been out with folks at protests there pushing back. Stanton has been silent on it. He takes money from corporate interests that are big tech interests, right, that are pushing that. So that's another one. But so much of it, I think, is the same stuff you'd hear on the doors knocking wherever you are, right? That people feel like it's harder to get by, whether it's housing, healthcare, utilities, groceries, and that there's just greater sense of just, There's a few that have it so good, right? While others are struggling. The vast majority, the rest of us, 99%, as we used to say, and concern around ICE and Trump's authoritarian violations. You know that we hear that so much, and I think you hear that from Democrats and from voters across the country. So we're those common interests we share.
So how can people get involved or find a campaign?
Kai4az.com, KAIFORAZ.com. You can find us on social media, Kai Newkirk. Uh, um, it's the only primary right in the country this month, right? And this is our opportunity to have the next big progressive victory and keep up the momentum from Colorado, New York, New Jersey, and build into all the August races. Our internal poll shows that we're tied. New endorsements, new supporters coming in, great numbers, responses on the doors and on the phones. It's right there. We've got to seize it. And we got people helping us out and have been for months from different places around the country. Joining us on phone banks, helping to push stuff on social media and donating. Our biggest challenge is having the resources to compete with our opponents' corporate backers. So whether you can pitch in $3 or 300 or 3,000, right? You need every bit in this surge, right? Our message is winning with Democrats. If we reach enough of them across all these different methods, then we can bring this victory home on July 21st, 12 days from now. So this is an opportunity for the whole progressive movement in our country, and we welcome everybody to be part of this fight here in Arizona, and bring it home with us.
All right. Well, good luck with that. It'll be very soon, and we'll be rooting for you.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I really appreciate being on with you, brother. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.